Really excited to be here. We're in Nairobi at Andela, Kenya. So if you see some construction going on behind the scenes or some noise in the background, that's kind of why. We're going to be connecting with a bunch of developers here in Andela. Really excited about getting this message out here in Kenya and in Africa in general, but also really excited about the work that's happening here at places like Andela, where software development is really being pushed as a new skill for developing of a new economy, and where blockchains and cryptocurrencies kind of fit into that. So. My name is Matthew Spoke. I'm the founder of the Aion Project. It's a blockchain project focused primarily on scale and interoperability of blockchain networks. So I guess we'll get a little bit more into the details of what that means, but we've been active in this space for a number of years. Just launched the Aion Network last year, and lots of exciting stuff going on our side.
Right. So you guys have been traveling. Just tell me how that has been in South Africa and now in Kenya, or wherever it is that you guys travel to.
Well, a big focus in 2017 was obviously getting the project off the ground, fundraising, kind of making a name for what we were doing. 2018 has been a very big focus on growing that community and that awareness among developers in different parts of the world. So this is among our list of trips that we're doing as a project to make sure that we can start to establish these developer communities. Right before coming to Nairobi, we were in South Africa, in Cape Town and Johannesburg, doing developer meetups, kind of connecting with local companies. We spoke at Blockchain Africa. The big emphasis for us and the big KPI this year is how many developers can we get engaging with us, using our technology, participating in our open source software development, really to take advantage of what this technology promises and where we see the future going in the blockchain space. So after we leave Nairobi, we're doing 2 events here in town. Really excited to be at Andela today, and then we're heading off to Asia in a few weeks to do in mainland China, Tokyo, and Seoul, Korea. So, and then more to come after that.
Right. So I guess the most important question is, what is the Aion Network?
Sure. Yeah. So maybe a quick background to tell you how we got to this problem that we're trying to solve now is we've been building about 4 years. I've been active in this space. Started in the enterprise market, worked at Deloitte in kind of technology consulting. Started a blockchain team there in 2014. Really focused on what was it about decentralized systems that might apply to large-scale enterprises and these incumbent businesses that we all use and rely on regularly. The more we did that kind of work, we started our company in 2016 to focus on this enterprise blockchain problem. The more we realized that there was a lot of infrastructure challenges that still needed to be solved. Challenges around performance and scale. How do you get these networks to be able to manage the transactions that you need? And then increasingly, we were building dozens and dozens of blockchains for different companies and different industries and different countries. And the question kept coming up regularly, well, how do these blockchains eventually communicate with each other? How do you allow these segregated networks to not be segregated? So we started putting some thought early 2017 into this problem of interoperability and connectivity between networks. And that's kind of what led to this project that we're currently focusing on, Aion, which really kind of comes down to how do you allow for the scale you need across many blockchains and then build that seamless mechanism for communication between blockchains so that data and logic and value can be moved between different blockchain networks. So that's kind of what sums up what our focus is with Aion.
All right. So when you guys say or when people say 3rd generation blockchain, what sort of context is that set for us?
So I think beyond 3rd generation blockchain, which is very specific to this industry, we really see this as a progression towards what we call the decentralized internet. And the decentralized internet is a second attempt at rebuilding the frameworks of the internet that we missed out on 20, 30 years ago. Because if you look at the way we kind of interact on the internet today, we do it very much through centralized gatekeepers, right? We do it through the Googles and the Amazons and the Baidus of the world. Although the intent of the internet had always been a decentralized communication protocol, we now have this opportunity to kind of re-architect. What would it look like for us to build the decentralized internet? And now, increasingly, in addition to communication, the ability to transfer value and to do, more and more business process on top of these systems. The challenge is how we've built blockchains to date is we've built them as isolated systems. So Ethereum is disconnected from Bitcoin, which is disconnected from Litecoin, which is disconnected from the private networks being built by banks. So we actually aren't building the internet. We're building a series of fragmented networks that have yet to figure out what is their equivalent to TCP/IP. What is going to be that common generic communication layer that allows you to move between these networks so that from a user's perspective, they don't actually know what system they operate on. You know, we get really deep into the weeds when we're inside the blockchain ecosystem.
Right.
Average users out there don't care about consensus algorithms and, you know, transaction scale and all these technical concepts.
Right.
Just like nobody needs to know how does the STTP protocol work in the internet, right? It's just, it's hidden behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And we're trying to build that layer of infrastructure such that we can do consumer applications a lot more easily in the future.
Excellent. So just to add on that, what do you think is the most is the lowest hanging fruit in terms of use cases in Africa? What you've seen?
Well, I think, you know, the opportunity in developing countries around the world, and, you know, is the financial infrastructures that are built are inefficient and are incapable of reaching kind of the entireties of these populations. So this is not an African problem. This is a problem in many places around the world, where we see that the big challenges of building financial infrastructure have always been the massive costs of these infrastructures. So you look at banks in North America and Western Europe and, you know, in China, well, everywhere really. These infrastructures cost billions and billions of dollars, and they come with limits and, you know, the ability to expand them into regions of the world where, you know, there's less internet connectivity, less physical infrastructure. It's very difficult to expand financial infrastructure out to these people, these unreached populations.
Right.
Blockchains have kind of given us an ability to build off of what is almost a free utility, a free infrastructure, right? So you can start to think about how do you build really, really interesting financial systems and financial applications that have nearly zero cost of infrastructure. Whereas it used to be that if you wanted to build a bank, you know, your cost to entry was maybe $1 billion or more. Now you can build a financial application that is accessible to people with a cost of infrastructure near zero. So it starts to unlock a lot of possibilities. I mean, immediately what we've seen over the last few years since the advent of Bitcoin is new remittance systems getting built, but remittance systems that don't require the infrastructure of, you know, these massive companies like MoneyGram, you know, where they've had to build infrastructure over decades and decades of time. Because now the infrastructure is really a smartphone and internet connection. And with that, you can start to build really, really complex financial systems. So, you know, this is more than a financial technology, but I think the early opportunities in some developing regions is financial access and building new systems that are really inclusive of everyone.
All right, so we'll circle back to that. Let's just talk about cryptocurrencies in general.
Sure.
What your outlook of cryptocurrencies in general in the world, and how we as Africans can take advantage of that.
So I think there's two things. One, you know, we talk about cryptocurrencies as financial assets, when in reality, and that they are that to a certain extent today.
Right.
There's a lot of interesting opportunities for people to develop wealth in these networks. But really, cryptocurrencies are more interesting because they are the fuel that powers these networks, right? So this is a concept that's never existed before, where you can have a collectively owned infrastructure, meaning it's owned by any of its users or all of its users collectively. And kind of like the internet, but with a monetization layer where those users, those owners, can earn off of that infrastructure. So it's not centrally owned or controlled, it's not shareholders, but nor is it a free infrastructure. Because somebody is providing something to the network. Let's say a miner is providing computing power to the network and being rewarded with a financial incentive. So all of a sudden you have this opportunity for people to collectively own these global infrastructures, which is massively important. But then on top of these infrastructures, you can build non-financial systems, right? So today we look at the cryptocurrency market and we see assets that can be traded. But what I find more interesting is what about these applications that are going to be built that have nothing to do with assets? How do we trade identity information, and how do we create medical systems and insurance policies and, you know, government registry systems, all stitched together by this economic incentive that's built into these systems. And the economic incentive is really, you identify a behavior that you want people to have, you know, act honestly and be transparent and, you know, validate each other's authenticity. And then you figure out what's the economic reason that they would do that, you know, because generally people left to their own will act in their own best interest. So you need to build a system where you're allowed to act in your own best interest, but for the good of the network, not in your own best interest at the expense of the network. And that's what the real innovation here around Bitcoin and all of these other systems that follow Bitcoin. So, you know, what that means is parts of the world where there's generally been this exclusion from the evolution of technology. Let's look at, like, you know, the dot-com era in the mid-90s and late 90s in North America and Western Europe primarily. A lot of these companies that were built with you know, the developing world excluded from those opportunities. You had very few early shareholders in Google from Africa or Southeast Asia. You had to be like an insider in these parts of the world to be a venture capitalist in North America and Silicon Valley to get access to these new waves of technology. Now you've got technologies that are going to be even more impactful on the world, but everyone, it's a very equal playing field. Everyone has an opportunity to participate. There are no barriers and walls that say, well, this person is preferenced over that person. So it really becomes like a global technology inherently, which is very different than this last wave of tech companies that were either primarily Chinese or American, and that's it. Now there really are global systems. So I find that really exciting.
So there's a lot of politics in the Bitcoin blockchain space generally. So how do you guys skirt over those type of political issues?
I think the politics started as a result of like a little bit of tribalism, where everybody kind of attached themselves religiously to a single protocol. Right. So I'm a Bitcoin believer, I'm an Ethereum believer, I'm an EOS believer, whatever. There's these new protocols getting built all the time, right? Our hypothesis had always been that these systems were being designed to solve different problems, meaning it wasn't one or the other and one above all others. It was different systems for different problems. But the challenge then became that if you had different systems for different problems, you still needed this interaction and this ability to integrate them one into the other. So the way we started designing Aion was really agnostic to Bitcoin or Ethereum or anything else that follows, but really that layer that sits between them, which I think most people can get aligned with. It's not hostile as a message. It's not we're going to win at the expense of others. It's we're going to build a protocol that is indifferent to who wins and who loses. It's a protocol that connects any various type of blockchain infrastructure. So we've been able to kind of step above a lot of the politics. Doesn't mean there are no politics, because we're not the only game in town trying to focus on interoperability as a solution. So there are definitely still politics at play, but I think increasingly we've moved away from one blockchain to rule them all to kind of a realization that to scale this technology efficiently, we do need multiple networks. Right. But then once you have multiple networks, then you have to solve this new problem, right? So we're focusing on that kind of second layer problem rather than that first layer problem.
So charting the middle path.
Yeah.
So circling back to Aion, where are you guys in terms of development, in terms of full-scale applications?
Sure.
Yeah.
So quick background on the company. The company was founded in early 2016, launched the project kind of in research. We'd been doing kind of a lot of private enterprise blockchain, as I mentioned. We were involved in founding something called the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, which I sit on the board of directors of. And then, when we got to that transition point in early 2017, we put our focus on Aion as our contribution to this ecosystem. For context, as a company, as a group, we're about 36 people today. We've got people in Canada, in Toronto, in Barbados, and in Romania. We're just about to open an office in mainland China, and we're kind of plotting out our strategy for growth beyond those 4 cities. Really trying to get that global focus and that global footprint. The technology today is kind of in its earlier stages of development. We've just released, we have a 3 major phase roadmap, each of which is a distinct public network launch. So we're in the final versions of our test network for phase 1. So phase 1 we call is in test network right now. So any developer can kind of jump in. The code's all open source. We released about 250,000 lines of code a couple of weeks ago. People can kind of run applications, run test transactions, run mining systems. We're anticipating that it'll be in its main network version sometime in mid Q2. Right. So we're targeting kind of May timeframe. Obviously, with engineering timelines, it's all a matter of like testing and quality assurance before we're really confident about putting it out. And then we've got another major release timed for the end of 2018, and then a release in 2019 with the next milestones coming up. But it is absolutely an active and used system today. People can build applications on it. They can they can earn revenue on it. All of these opportunities kind of in its first iteration. So we're definitely looking. The team we're anticipating doubling the size of the team in the next 6 months or so, and then beyond that is really community developer involvement, right? Getting third-party developers to participate in our GitHub, to become core contributors, or to build tools and applications on top of the network. So that's kind of the purpose of our meetup circuit right now, is just to go get the message out to developer groups and convince them that this should be an area that they focus on when they jump into the blockchain space.
Yeah, speaking of development, what do you think about the training, or rather the skills of blockchain developers, and what can be done more for developers to really be out there and build products and build such networks?
So we've got broadly about 3 types of groups, technical focuses that we focus on. So one, I'd say, is app developers, people that want to use this network as the underlying infrastructure to build their app.
Right.
The second would be core contributors, so people that want to get involved in helping us design the protocol on next versions. And the third is other blockchain projects that want to build what we call bridges. So this is that interconnectivity layer, right? So other blockchain protocols that are interested in building bridges between them and Aion. So depending on who we're targeting, it's a very different message, right? If we're talking to other blockchain protocols, you know, they tend to be very deep in the industry already. They've developed the skills over a number of years, and they're building something really unique. And we want to be able to build these bridges with as many of these blockchain protocols as possible. So we've got a number of partnerships that we've been working on there, groups that we're going to be doing these connections with. Our first bridge that we're building is from the Aion network to the Ethereum network, but we've also got kind of a long list of other networks that we're going to be bridging into. The second group on core contributions is people that have that, that protocol interest, that have that deep level of like almost operating system engineers that want to help us build the next version of our virtual machine, or want to help us run research on the economic principles behind our mining algorithm.
Right.
And then finally, these app developers, which I think is where we're going to get the most adoption, in terms of the most number of people that can actively roll their sleeves up and get involved, is people that have ideas of what types of businesses they can build, or what's the next version of CryptoKitties that can be built, right? Or whatever these things are. In that category, there's an enormous amount of just kind of skills conversion that can happen. You look at the average kind of JavaScript developer around the world, or Java developer around the world, and there's, a relatively simple transition for them to be able to pick up the skills required to build blockchain applications. It really comes down to a different way of architecting and thinking about how people engage with these systems, rather than really having to introduce new languages or new skills fundamentally. So, what's been really interesting about our time here in Nairobi, we're at Andela right now, learning a little bit about their approach to how they train software developers, and we've been seeing this kind of emerging around the world, where everybody realizes that the future of business, doesn't matter what industry, the future of business is software. So developing those skills in different regions is massively important, but then introducing into those curriculums why blockchains are going to become the future of business as well. So it's not just learning how to become web developers, but it's also making sure that the skills for blockchain as well as other kind of emerging technologies are being picked up by these new skills.
Right. So let's talk about the financial element. Any ICO in that thing?
So we raised money last year.
Right.
In about September, October, we raised about 25 million US at the time.
Right.
And that's kind of what's funded our initial progress.
Right.
Now for the foreseeable future, what we're doing is we're structuring for Aion its governance under a nonprofit foundation. The Aion Foundation will be kind of mandated with the research and development of the protocol, as well as with the growth of the ecosystem that surrounds that protocol. So there's no immediate kind of expectation of having to raise revenue again, because right now we're focusing on kind of that getting that message out there and growing the awareness of what we're doing.
Right. So, and finally, you could just tell us who you are, basically.
Sure.
Behind Aion Network, and how you became the person you are right now.
Probably a little bit of an unorthodox background compared to most people in this industry. I mean, I'm a chartered accountant by education and by background. I started my career at Deloitte. That's when I first came across Bitcoin in 2012, just as in personal interest, and had dabbled around a little bit in it, nothing crazy. And in 2014, I had the opportunity to pitch the idea of why Bitcoin was going to change the world of auditors and financial, accountants. And in fact, the pitch was aggressive. At the time, I was saying, well, Bitcoin's going to make our profession unnecessary and irrelevant. And I submitted that to some of our senior leaders at the firm that I was working at the time. And caught a few people's attention. What is this new technology? Why is it putting our business at risk? What does it mean to have perfectly transparent financial systems such that you don't need to hire somebody to come and give confidence on transactions, right? Which is essentially what the audit profession is, if you really boil it down to a really simple function. So that's what got me really into this professionally. So starting in early 2014, this became my full-time occupation. So I built an R&D team inside Deloitte for about 2 years. We did some experimental testing around Bitcoin, around Ethereum, around other technologies that were emerging. Left Deloitte in early 2016 to start my company, Nuco, which is the company that started the Aion Project, and with that launched the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. I mean, it's just a matter of having spent the time, right? And I think I'm now in four years in or something like that, having spent the time familiarizing myself and learning these very complex topics. You know, but I think what I found really interesting is the more I met people in the industry, the more I realized that some of the leading minds were not necessarily software developers. There's a ton of brilliant software developers in this industry, so don't get me wrong, but there also are people that come at it from different angles and different backgrounds that provide a new perspective that sometimes gets missed if you're only a software developer, right? So, because this is a mix of economics and philosophy and software development and game theory. There's a whole bunch of topics at play here that approaching it only from one perspective, you often miss some of the broader picture of these other really, really critical pieces, right? Like, you can build amazing software and completely overlook the human behavioral component of a blockchain. You know, the economic incentives that need to be at play to achieve the intended outcome that you want. So that's what I think has been kind of interesting is realizing that you do need people of multiple skill sets to come into this industry to provide their own kind of context and perspective. If not, you miss the point.
Definitely. So just as a closing statement, maybe you want to say something to anyone who wants to build a business around blockchain or who wants to go into blockchain development, but basically what you think is the future.
Sure.
Say it somehow, but just directly.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, anybody who's got an interest in this, I find I get a lot of people who approach me and ask, like, you know, you're not a developer, how did you get involved in this industry? How can I get involved? I have a business background, I have a philosophy background, I have whatever. I mean, the simplest thing to do is just start. I mean, start reading, start watching videos, start watching these types of interviews. You'll be surprised how quickly you can kind of ramp yourself up to being at a level of relevance knowledge, right? There's a lot of people out there that know nothing about this industry. So the moment you know a little bit more than them, you almost can position yourself as a thought leader in this space, right? And we need more ideas. We need more people to enter this industry. And, you know, on the software side, we need a lot more software development skills. There's a massive shortage of engineers in this industry. So if you're a developer who's curious, I mean, jump into a project, see how you can contribute to an open source code base, say you can try building your own app. I mean, our big pitch to the industry is that this fragmented way of building blockchains, where you either have to build an app on blockchain A or blockchain B or blockchain C, is eventually going to fade away. And you're going to see that these systems become ubiquitous behind the scenes. Software development at the application layer will happen without necessarily tying an application to a single underlying infrastructure, but allowing applications to live across multiple networks. So that's the pitch we're making to application developers. If they've already started dabbling around with certain blockchain technologies, understanding that, you know, one of the big risks is if I build an app on blockchain X, what if blockchain X doesn't succeed? Does that mean my business has failed? Can I not build my app in such a way that it's a little bit more de-risked from that perspective, where it can live across multiple networks, have its logic kind of sitting in many places? So that's kind of our pitch and view of the world. I mean, all of this to say it's less critical, like the building blocks to get there. It's really the vision that we're trying to unlock, which is all about kind of putting power back in the hands of the users in the context of communication and value. So this concept of the decentralized internet is really what drives us. Understanding that the new businesses that get built are not going to be, we often hear, hey, who's going to be the next Facebook? Who's going to be the next Google? We don't see it that way, because, you know, that implies that these next major businesses have to be these centralized monstrosities rather than providing, you know, microservices in a decentralized ecosystem. So I hope that there is no next Facebook and that there is no next Google. I really hope that we see the next versions of businesses getting built in networks of decentralized applications, where there's more power in the hands of the users and less power in the hands of centralized institutions. So hopefully that's the case.
I love that. I love that. Ladies and gentlemen, that has been Matt Spoke for you guys, and just follow him on his social media and go to their meetups, and we'll see what they will be doing, and blockchain forever.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers, man.
Awesome, man.